Alright, we're back with the second part of MK Ultraism, and how survivors cope with the multitude of horrors they faced while subjected to the strong influences of this mind-altering methods and outright brainwashing. As mentioned, the purpose of these experimentations is to see what it takes to break through the mind's deepest layers of defenses. But the biggest red flag will always be the hidden triggers that get activated with a single word, a phone tone, or hand gesture. That was mentioned in the last video, where it seems like someone you're talking to suddenly leaves the conversation. It's as if they don't even know who the hell you're in a matter of seconds. Like you were always a complete stranger from the get-go. Basically, it seems as if they were rebooted, without them noticing anything has taken place, nor the person who's likely now staring at them trying to figure out what's up with their sudden robotic-like silence. Well, that's pretty much the story of the next few people we're going to focus on in this video. These are former users of LSD, and also people who were inducted into the Project Monarch. And that's not to include members belonging to an infamous cult, many of you I'm sure know very well, as it was mentioned in session 8 toward the end of that video. So, from here, we're about to discuss 3 well-known cases that gained a lot of attention through the years. The 3 most talked about former MK Ultra victims are Cathy O'Brien, Brice Taylor, and Arizona Wilder. We first start with Cathy O'Brien, who stands as one of the most prominent and vocal survivors of the CIA's infamous MK Ultra program, which is allegedly a sub-project known as Project Monarch, where she claims being subjected to extreme trauma-based mind control from early childhood. According to her detailed accounts, O'Brien endured systematic sexual abuse at the hands of her own father, who was employed within military service. She states that he sold her into a local Michigan mafia-linked child pornography ring sanctioned by figures like then-Congressman Gerald Ford. And the abuse escalated into full-scale CIA involvement by age 5, fracturing her psyche into dissociative identity disorder, DID. This was done by conducting ritualistic torture, electroshock, and drug-induced programming designed to create programmable alters for espionage, sex slavery, and political manipulation. She was rescued in 1988 alongside her daughter Kelly, who was also inducted into the program, by intelligence insider Mark Phillips. Phillips used deprogramming techniques rooted in neuro-linguistic reversal and safe recall methods to help her reclaim her memories and autonomy. O'Brien has since become a whistleblower, authoring the groundbreaking 1995 book Transformation of America, co-written with Phillips. In the book they expose a sprawling conspiracy involving high-profile figures from presidents, Hollywood celebrities, even foreign dignitaries who engaged in networks of child exploitation and mind control. Her narrative, further elaborated in Access Denied for Reasons of National Security 2004, and PTSD Time to Heal, 2017, details how these programs weaponized dissociation to enforce amnesia barriers and trigger responses. Despite widespread skepticism from scholars like Michael Barkin, O'Brien's testimony has profoundly influenced conspiracy culture, satanic ritual abuse discourse, and survivor advocacy, with her 2022 documentary called Trance. The Cathy O'Brien story amplified these revelations to new audiences. Next comes Brice Taylor. Her legal name is actually Susan Ford. She's one of the most detailed and controversial alleged survivors of trauma-based mind control connected to Project Monarch. Taylor has stated she was deliberately handed into the program at age 2 by her abusive family. She says her father was paid by the CIA to deliver her for sexual and psychological conditioning that lasted into the 1980s. Taylor's situation is unlike Cathy O'Brien's, who was primarily used as a high-level political courier and sex slave. Taylor instead describes herself as a presidential model, who was groomed to be a mind-controlled asset reserved almost exclusively for U.S. presidents, high-ranking officials, and select entertainers from Eisenhower through the George H.W. Bush administrations. In her 1999 OK Thanks for the Memories, The Truth Has Set Me Free, self-published after more than 50 mainstream publishers rejected it. In the publication she mentions ex-presidents, high-ranking military servicemen, foreign dignitaries who engaged in networks of child exploitation and mind control. In Taylor's books she points out how these programs can be used to enforce amnesia barriers and triggers. She also describes being programmed at locations such as the Bob Hope Classic Golf Tournament, Disneyland's Club 33, the Hearst Castle, NASA facilities, and the Bohemian Grove. These ritual elements were sometimes incorporated to deepen the trauma bonding. Taylor states that her programming followed the same 7-element template seen in other survivor testimonies: early and repeated sexual torture, electroshock, sensory deprivation tanks, hallucinogenic drugs, especially scopolamine and early ketamine variants. Practices such as hypnotic scripting, and the implantation of trigger phrases, or even songs like "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" and "White Rabbit" were recurring ones for her, and hand signals. Her mind was reportedly fractured into hundreds of alters, including child alters for sex, courier alters for delivering classified messages or drugs planted within her vagina or rectum, and kitten alters, strictly for elite entertainment. She claims now deceased presidential advisor Henry Kissinger personally oversaw the creation of a sophisticated internal hierarchy modeled within the Wizard of Oz. Taylor was then given intensive therapy to the point where she regained full recall of the things that she experienced in the late 1980s and early 1990s with Dr. Catherine Gould and other specialists in ritual abuse and mind control. Taylor also talked about giving birth to her daughter Kelly in 1974, and was immediately taken from her. Kelly too wound up as a victim of MK Ultraism, and was to participate in assignments with her mother Brice. They eventually were rescued and they moved on living their lives. Taylor's closing message is nearly identical to Cathy O'Brien's: the programming never fully disappears, but with the right support, safety, and spiritual grounding, the survivor can sit in the driver's seat again. And last brings us to Arizona Wilder, and that's not to mention Arizona Wilder's story. She was yet another MK Ultra survivor who spoke in a video about the problematic issues she endured later in life after being inducted within the program years ago. She was also inducted into the program, and laid out details in an interview in 1999 how the mind can be split, resulting with victims left to juggle numerous personalities. Wilder even mentioned in that interview how former Princess Diana was subjected to the same type of brainwashing practices that led to Diana having a psychological break as an end result. Basically, Wilder is suggesting that Diana, like other MK Ultra victims, were being manipulated on a grand scale. After being deprogrammed, Wilder started speaking out about her experiences, and how difficult it was to turn her life around. Although her memories will always linger around like lint constantly floating through the air that lands on whatever surface, accumulating like dust. But it's like what was mentioned in Session 8, the suggestive programming these people endured was very taxing when used by specialists such as Dr. Ewan Cameron. So, even when victims like O'Brien, Taylor, or Wilder try to come clean about their experiences for the very first time, they might suddenly freeze up, or pause for a long while before saying anything next. Or they just stop mid-sentence due to the word trigger that was brainwashed in place to protect the ones who violated them. Under the program hypnotic lure, they would automatically get triggered when they were around specific individuals. Basically, these were well-known people, who held a high level of status and prestige that the majority of the public would never suspect to have engaged in such practices. And it's very challenging for therapists to deprogram ex-MK Ultra victims, which is like trying to drive a car riding on boxes instead of tires. Yeah, that's a very hard feat to pull off. That's not to mention the suspension damage you'll be paying that will basically pull you in line for a newer expensive EV car. Now there's a rough analogy. And next is the infamous Manson family members, and that's not to mention the many other members who Manson inducted within his hippie cult. The most noted members, as many would come to know, were Susan Atkins, or Sexy Sadie as Manson coined the name for her. Then there's Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten and Tex Watson, who were involved in the Tate and Blanca murders that occurred between August 9th to the 10th back in 1969 on back-to-back days. And it's important to know that on the 9th at Tate and Polanski's residence, Manson ordered Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Watson to take out any occupants within the house. Then the following night on the 10th, the same deal applied to the unfortunate victims living within the La Blanca residence. Also, this is to say that Lisa Kasabian basically served only as the driver and lookout girl on the 9th. And she resumed in the role as driver only on the 10th. So, she was granted immunity, giving testimony to all of what she witnessed at Tate's residence. But, there's one thing that stands as an ongoing riddle that puzzles many to this very day. Many still wonder how in the world did Manson brainwash these individuals so easily? Well, that takes us back to a dark time where certain practices of mental manipulation were allowed to flourish. So, important to understand these are programs that were heavily tested upon victims of the Holocaust. In fact, I remember this one lady, Marie. She was a Holocaust survivor. She said her family were captured and taken to one of the camps when she was 5 years old. From there, she stated her family was broken up, and she never knew whether or not her parents survived. All she knew was that she was lucky to survive, especially being at such a young age. I asked her about any experimentations that prisoners were subjected to, but she stated never seeing anything like that take place. Again, that would probably be due to her age. So if you think about it, that was like a blanket of protection for her, not being noticed. But, after the Allied powers descended down upon Hitler's Third Reich, it was over. And that's where a huge number of German scientists and researchers were brought to America. The purpose for their acceptance, despite their horrific crimes, they were gatekeeping knowledge about various programs. This spilled over into our intelligence agencies, and thus later gave birth to MK Ultraism. That led to prominent and fairly known figures suspected of being involved in these operations as handlers of the victims inducted within these MK programs. This touches on the darkest, most controversial parts of US intelligence history. MK Ultra was eventually inducted within American culture, and this is not meaning to say law-abiding citizens would find any of this acceptable. Instead, it was purposely passed along to the unsuspecting youth especially during the 50s, 60s and 70s. The 60s was the perfect testing ground for more advanced experimentation. As mentioned in Session 8, Woodstock served as the prime example there. Alongside that was Charles Manson's use of the intoxicating substance upon his Manson family members. He used LSD's potent effects to sway young teens like the main members such as Susan Atkins, Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel, among others not mentioned. And there of course were the other members like Lynette Fromm and Sandra Good. Tex Watson was the powerhouse used by Manson to enforce whatever terror upon innocent individuals he wanted taken out. And the prime factor that drove Manson to setting up victims for demise stemmed from his rejection by the Beach Boys music producer Terry Melcher. Manson had a chance to break into the limelight of Hollywood as a guitar musician. He met Dennis Wilson, who was a drummer for the Beach Boys, in 1968. How that came to be was thanks to the fact that Wilson came upon two girls hitchhiking, which was Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey. Unbeknownst to Wilson, they were Manson's girls. That eventually led up to a visit due to Manson himself, with other family members deciding to pay Wilson a long visit at his residence. Over time, Wilson decided to push the idea to Terry Melcher about Manson's musical talents. And Melcher listened, and ultimately was not taken by the idea of granting Manson a contract signed with either Brother Records nor Columbia Records. These were both record labels the Beach Boys were tilted under at that time. So, the real reason why wouldn't Melcher accept Charlie for a record deal? Well, it was the type of people surrounding Manson. And that's not to mention Melcher's visit to the Span Ranch. Seeing the family's living conditions and strange actions showcased by the girls was a total deal breaker for him. Melcher's mind was clearly blasted straight out of the water, no doubts. And it didn't help any when he initially told Manson that he wasn't good enough to cut the mustard. Melcher basically dropped the entire notion like a bad habit. So, in short, Manson wanted Melcher erased from the face of the earth permanently. This undoubtedly was the top reason why Melcher turned the property lease over to Tate and her former movie director husband, then Roman Polanski. That doesn't even account for those who discovered Manson visiting Melcher's place in January of '69. Plus Manson learned about Melcher's sudden move away from the property through photographer Sherok Hadami, via door intercom, who was during a photo shoot of Tate that day. It's even stated that Sharon caught a glimpse of Manson through a window that very month, and was creeped out after doing so. And she couldn't have realized her demise was only months ahead. So, from there people see today how it all came into frame, the very bad future situation left for Sharon and her guests to endure come August in '69. Yet, it didn't matter to him anyway, and he targeted the wrong individuals anyway because the place simply belonged previously to a now missing Terry Melcher at 10,050 Shiloh Drive. So, when it came time to carry out the sinister deed, Roman Polanski was overseas at the time. Manson ordered his followers to go take out the occupants in that house and make it look witchy, and it's here where things get totally chaotic from 0 to 60 seconds once Atkins, Krinwinkle, Kasabian and Watson arrive on the scene. Steve Parent, a teen, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Watson took him out first with 4 gunshots. Inside Tate's residence, there were guests as well as influential individuals visiting her on the 9th. Manson's crew enacted Manson's orders by taking out the perceived targets. Here's the list. Abigail Folger, who was heir to the Folger's coffee family business. Wojciech Frykowski was Folger's boyfriend. Tate's secret lover Jay Seberg was a hairstylist working within the Hollywood elite circles. Stephen Parent was a caretaker lending his services, was the first taken out by Watson while he was in his car about to leave the property. And finally, Sharon Tate, Hollywood actress, who was saved to be finished off last. Atkins used Tate's blood to smear the words pig toward the lower part of the front door, making sure the authorities would seem to believe that Tate and her friends were targeted by the Black Panthers. This was Manson's sick idea leading up to the Helter Skelter controversy. Now it's time for a few subtle facts that took place throughout the night. Abigail Folger had the best chance to escape, and in this we're talking a possibly because she spots Atkins roaming past the room she was relaxing in between 12 midnight and 1 a.m. A very naive Folger just waved to her, and Atkins simply waved and smiled back, not realizing the danger she would find herself in once Atkins finally came back for her brandishing a knife in hand, and then all hell broke loose. Abigail should have got her ass up and carefully made her way out of the house right then and there, because it no way in hell would you just sit there after seeing a complete stranger walk past like that's a normal thing at 12 to 1 early in the morning. And from there, victims were either chased down, beaten, stabbed to death, and some were both stabbed and shot. But all of this again falls back to the drugs Manson had access to, which the Haight-Ashbury Clinic stood as a hefty source back then. And the mental state of his followers ranged possibly redeemable to not a snowball's chance in hell type of non-redeemable. Plus, many suspect Manson was an CIA agent used as a tool to gather subjects to test mind manipulation tactics on, which he in fact did control many of his youth followers, with a firm grip. This also points a big fat finger at Woodstock, which took place a few days after the murders. And it's hard not to say some of this could have indirectly been a part of a testing ground scenario to see how powerful drugs can be used to sway and control others. So, was Manson a handler of his young family members? That remains a loose end. But it's damn hard to say that apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Then there's the other aspect to ponder about, was Dr. Jolly West. He was another manipulator using LSD to conduct MK-Ultra-like experiments on his victims, or rather test subjects. West was also one of the key figures that conducted LSD experiments on individuals at the Haight-Ashbury Clinic. If you really want to dive deep into the mind blast mechanics behind Jolly West, then you want to check out a book titled Chaos by author Tom O'Neill. Within that book are a mix of historical accounts, trial testimonies, and investigative works that provide different perspectives about West's unethical practices involving LSD. Check out the link below in the description if you're interested in learning more about that audiobook. It was also noted that West experimented on animals, even an elephant he purposely pumped a high dosage of LSD into, which led to the animal's rapid demise. Keep in mind this is the very same Jolly West who met up with Harvey Oswald's killer Jack Ruby back in 1964. Sometime in that year, Ruby was heavily suspected in his indirect involvement in JFK's murder to target Oswald. He was paid to silence Oswald, which led to the dismissal of further questioning the events that surrounded the now 60-plus-year-old case. With that out of the way, left still one chess piece that needed to be cleared from the board, and that was Ruby himself. How does the old term goes? Loose lips sink ships. They had to be others who put Ruby up to task to take out Oswald. No doubt worried them because he might talk for a plea deal as he was looking at stiff prison time. Enter Jolly West, who injected Ruby with some type of experimental cancer, which takes him out in a matter of hours. So, remember folks. No witnesses, no case, the real culprits walk away scot-free. All in all, it shows how twisted individuals exploited LSD's power to warp reality, turning idealistic, naive or broken individuals into super-obedient servants, to hardened killers beyond anyone's imagination. It's a stark reminder of how drugs and manipulation can push people way past high levels of extreme. Okay, if you liked what you heard today about the intense craziness of Part 2 on MK Ultraism, then smash that like button and make sure to subscribe to Mind Blast Mechanics, where we dive deep into the observations that matter. Don't miss our next video, so make sure to tap that bell. Thanks for watching.